Okay, it is Wednesday, December 16th, 2020, and this is for Science of Cooking. Today, we're going to be making a basil walnut pesto, okay? So pesto is classically Italian flavors. It is a great sauce that you can use for a quick pasta night dish. It's something that you can make ahead of time and freeze to have on hand. It can be used with things like grilled chicken or fish, right, that are sauteed. So pesto is also great just to spread a little bit on some toasted bread too. But what we're going to start with today is the walnuts, right? So I've got a little cast iron pan here on my stove. I'm just going to turn my burner on medium, just to get some heat going on that burner real quick. But I just got my little cast iron 10-inch skillet here, dry, nothing in it, no oil or anything, right? And we're going to be toasting some walnuts. Now, nuts have their own natural oil, so that's why I don't need to add anything to the pan. But I'm looking to take these raw nuts and toast them to get a little bit more flavor out of them, right? Now, traditional pesto is done with pine nuts, right, from a pine tree. But we're going to use walnuts today because they're a little bit cheaper, right? So we just have a regular store, you know, shelled walnuts, so they're already out of the shell. They can be chopped. They can be whole. That doesn't matter because they're going to get chopped up in the food processor anyways, right? So I'm going to do about a half a cup of walnuts, and I'm going to do a generous, I call it generous half a cup. This is one of those few times I kind of overfill a little bit because since they're not chopped, there's a lot of open air space in there. So I just go slightly over a heaping half cup of the walnuts right into the skillet, okay? And you don't have to do anything fancy with them. We're just going to dry toast these for a few minutes just to extract some of that flavor out. And you're going to smell the aroma in the house, right? So just give them a stir occasionally. I'm also going to add in some garlic, right? So I have my little individual cloves. I popped out of the head already. And I'm going to take 3 whole cloves of garlic, but I'm not going to peel them just yet. I'm just literally going to drop them into this pan. So 3 of them, with my generous half a cup of walnuts. And this is going to go on the stove for a few minutes to toast, okay? So we're not peeling that garlic because I feel my burner is already heating up over here. We will peel that after though, right? We're not going to leave the peels on, but we're just trying to toast the garlic a little bit at the same time as the nuts. If you're worried about keeping an eye on things, you can toast them separately or you can do them at the same time in the pan. So you're going to want to have a spoon handy or something for this. Right, so occasionally just stir and toast those nuts. Like I said, and it's just dry because, you know, pesto, we're just trying to extract as much flavor out as we can. And we're going to have a lot of competing flavors between the basil, the nuts, and the cheese. So just occasionally every, you know, minute or so, give that a quick little stir. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? So it's just the whole walnuts, got 3 garlic cloves, and we'll go back to those in a few minutes, okay? The next part that we're going to get ready is the basil. Now, I already washed the basil, so you're going to notice that it gets a little dark spots and things. That's okay. That's just bruising, right? This was nice and bright and green earlier, but this is going to end up in the food processor anyways, getting all chopped up. So a couple of bruised leaves is not going to matter, right? When you're looking for basil in the grocery store, you want to make sure that you're looking for, you know, bigger packages tend to be a better value, right? They have those little tiny plastic ones hanging on the shelf in the produce section. And for the same price, I got a giant bag of it. So make sure to look around, you know, and ask the produce people, you know, if there's a better size package of pesto. Because you need to have 2 cups of basil leaves. So this is a 2-cup measure. It's a nice big one, right? You can see it's good size. But I only need the leaves. So we're not going to use those stems for the pesto, right? So like I said, I'm going to take these thicker stems off and just these large basil leaves. And this is a beautiful basil size, right? I want to get all these little tender leaves off of there as well because those are going to have a lot of flavor. But we need 2 cups of basil leaves, loosely packed. And this was washed and patted dry with paper towel, so they're a little damp, but that's okay. And we don't need to chop these by hand because these are going to go into my food processor. Now, you can do this whole pesto recipe by hand, okay? There's no reason why you can't. After you toast your nuts, you can chop those by hand. You can chop up your basil. You can do this in a mortar and pestle, right? I'm just churning my nuts here real quick. Turning that heat down just a little bit. There we go. Okay. So I can already smell them getting nice and toasty. So I said we're taking these basil leaves. Want to get 2 cups of this total. But we don't want any of those big stems, okay? So the nuts and the garlic I have back here, they're getting toasted, they're getting a little bit of color on them, right? You see a little smokiness to it, that's okay. So at this point, I'm gonna shut the heat off. It only takes about 3 minutes total for this process, right? And I'm just gonna finish pulling a few more basil leaves for our pesto, right? So this is something that you can make ahead. I store some in the freezer so I can have it for a quick weeknight meal. Pesto is great for things like grilled fish. So when things come off the grill, right? Okay. We've got our 2 cups of basil leaves, just about here. A few last leaves. And now, like I said, I'm going to use a food processor today that is a great tool because it does a lot of, you know, chopping, slicing, dicing stuff fairly quickly, right? So this is the food processor, okay? Now this is just, you know, a Hamilton and Beach. It's nothing super fancy. There are more industrial ones. It's got little suction cups on the feet for it. It does have multiple parts. So food processors have a lid that have a locking mechanism on them so that you can't use this if the lid's not locked in place properly. So it won't be able to blow off the top, right? It's got a nice sized blade to it. So you want to be really careful with these because this is super sharp, right? When you're washing these by hand, you want to use a brush or something so you don't have to actually touch the blade, right? So that blade sets in there all on its own. My basil leaves are going to go in here now to get that started, right? We're just have them sitting in here waiting. So we've got our 2 cups of chopped basil leaves. And then we're going to take and add in our walnuts and garlic, okay? Now, for the nuts, they just need to go in, okay? So you'll see they get a little bit toasted, a little bit of color to them. The garlic's got a little toasting on it. So I'm going to put the garlic to the side. And then I'm going to put this into the food processor with the basil, okay? I don't need to chop these because the machine's going to chop it for me. But if you were doing this by hand, you would want to chop these up by hand really nice and fine with a knife and a cutting board, okay? I'm going to put our walnuts in there. And I like using walnuts for my pesto because it's a nice neutral flavor. Pine nuts can be a little bit strong for people. So this is a little bit milder version. Okay. Now with the garlic, I just need to get those peels off. So all I need to do is just come in with my knife and give them a little smack, right? And then I can just take those peels out. And then these are going to go, the whole cloves, right into the food processor. Like I said, pesto is really easy. It's not a super complicated recipe. Not a lot of ingredients, but it's got a nice fresh flavor to it, right? So we're going to take and we're going to add that in. Now this also calls for olive oil, right? So just a regular plain olive oil. It doesn't need to be extra virgin olive oil. It's going to be about 7 to 8 tablespoons total, okay? And I'll be honest, when I normally make pesto, I don't use measuring spoons. I just kind of swirl it in there until I get the right consistency because I've done this so many times. But when you're starting out doing this for the first time, you're going to want to use a measuring spoon to start getting an idea of how much. So I'm going to put about 6 tablespoons in for now. Five and 6. And if I need a little bit more after, I'll swirl a little extra in. Okay? So we're just shy of the 7 to 8, right? And that's why I said it's a guideline. Depends on how well it purees together. So when this lid goes on, it has to come to that lock. It can't be off a little bit. It's got to click in place, right? That's the only way that this thing's going to turn on because of the safety features, which is a good thing, right? You don't want to be reaching in there and stuff. This has a pulse mode on it too for a food processor. It's just got a little dial here in numbers. So I can just turn it on, But what I like to do is to use that pulse feature because it's going to take and zing around and then everything kind of settles down and then it picks it back up again, right? So it's kind of like scraping the bottom of the bowl for me. You're going to see how quickly this comes together. You can see it's got a little bit of steam to it right now too because those nuts were warm and toasted, right? So I'm just going to come in with my little spatula here. And you can see it's looking good texture-wise, right? But it's a little bit too dry and it needs to be a little bit finer. So we're just going to scrape down the sides of the bowl, just like if you were using a stand mixer. And I'm going to drizzle in a little bit more olive oil, about a couple tablespoons. There we go. And then after you do these kind of things for a while, cooking becomes, you know, the thing about sight and smells and things. You can see the texture. You'll be able to be familiar with it, right? I can see my liquid starting to slosh around a little bit there, which is a good thing. Just want to see how we're looking. And this smells really good. There's going to be one more part to this besides my salt and pepper, right? Now, nice thing about these too is that typically there's a hole in the top of the lid that you can pour in things like extra oil. So once this spins a little, I can pour a little bit down, my liquid down the top, and it stops it from splashing all up and out. Okay. So this is pretty much at the point where I'm going to leave this where it is for a moment. And we're going to be adding in our last ingredient to our pesto, which is going to be the Parmesan cheese. So you want to use a nice block Parmesan, right? You don't want to use that dry stuff in the can that you put on your spaghetti, okay? That green jar. You want to get a nice little, chunk of Parmesan. Buy the store brand. This is like $3.50, and this will last you for months in your fridge, okay? You want to use something like a box grater, right? You can do the larger pieces, but typically for something like pesto, it's a little bit on the finer side. So I'm going to use these little holes over here on this side. And we're going to be adding in a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. Right? I've already got a little bit shredded from the last little nibs of my last block. And this Parmesan is great for all kinds of Italian recipes, right? You want a real authentic cheese. And you'll see that I'm doing this over a bowl so I don't lose anything. You could also take a piece of wax paper and put your grater over that. And then that way it'll save all the cheese that gets grated. So you're not going to lose anything. All right, let me move a couple things out of the way here. Now with this food processor, I'm going to take and scrape out my pesto into a little bowl. Right here, okay. And this just unlocks from the base. So one of the easiest things to do is to take that blade out, right? You don't want to try and tip your bowl with the blade attached, okay? Because that could fall and hit your other hand, and you don't want to get cut, okay? So I usually just take a little rubber spatula, clean off my blade, set that to the side someplace safe and out of the way, okay? And then I'm going to scrape out my pesto blend. So here's the pesto mix, right? And it doesn't look like a lot, but pesto is very concentrated in flavor, so you don't need a lot to put on your pasta, right? Because this is a lot of oil, so it does have a good, fair amount of calories to it, but a little goes a long way. Okay? So I want to scrape this out really well. So I want to get all that yumminess out. I don't want to waste any ingredients. And then we're going to season this and add our cheese. And that's it for pesto. Okay, so there we go, right? There's my pesto blend. So this was the basil leaves, the toasted walnuts, the toasted and peeled garlic, right? And olive oil. So I'm going to take a good sized pinch of just some kosher salt. Doesn't need to be a lot. And this is to taste this part, right? So if you like a little more salt, add a little more salt. But I would let it sit for a little bit before you re-season, right? A couple good cracks of black pepper. And then we're going to do a 1/4 cup of the grated Parmesan cheese. So a nice packed quarter cup. Right, nice and full. And you're going to add that right in. So think of all those Italian flavors, right? The olive oil. You definitely want to make sure you use olive oil, not vegetable oil, right? So real olive oil, the walnuts, the basil, and the cheese, right? And that's going to give you a really beautiful flavor. Okay. Now to store this, you can do a couple of things. You can put this into the fridge for up to 5 days, okay? But what you're going to want to do is cover the top of it with a little drizzle of olive oil so that it doesn't turn brown, right? Because as the leaves are bruised now, this will start to turn brown. One of the best ways I find to save this is to portion this up into little jars. So you can use things like little canning jars and stuff, and then stick that in the freezer, okay? Or a little Tupperware container or something like that. So save enough for a meal for your size family, and then just pull it out of the freezer into the fridge the day before you want to use it. And you can thaw it in the fridge overnight, or you can just take it and stick it in just a little bowl of warm water for a little while, and it'll thaw very quickly, right? But this pesto, like I said, it's great for a quick pasta night. So you can make, it makes a decent sized batch that will do a couple of meals easily. Okay? So it's nice, it's light, good punch of flavor. Like I said, if you like more cheese, add in more cheese. If you like more pepper, add more pepper, salt, things like that, right? So that is your basil walnut pesto. Like I said, if you don't have a food processor, you can go old school. You can grind things up like your nuts and stuff in a mortar and pestle, right? You can do a lot of your chopping by hand. It'll just have a little bit rougher texture to it, but you want to try and make sure when you are chopping by hand, you get that basil as super fine as you can when you run the knife through it, okay? So that's it for today. So hopefully you guys learned something new for your pasta night.